I'd like to introduce our first mentor. Leah McConney is a marine biologist, and I'm just have to flip my screen here to see who she works with. She actually works with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So Leah, I know that you want to share your screen, and I think you have a bit of a presentation, and then we can have a little chat afterwards.
Alrighty. Well, thanks again so much for having me here today. As mentioned, my name is Leah McConney. I am an oceans biologist, and I currently work for the federal government. So I work for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, also known as DFO. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am today, and what I love about my job that I'm in right now. So I was actually born and raised in Brampton, Ontario, so I'm actually not from the East Coast. Brampton is a city outside of Toronto, so I grew up in suburbia, no oceans nearby. But both my parents immigrated from the Caribbean when they were younger, and lots of trips as a child were spent going on vacation down to Barbados, where my mom is from. And we loved going out on the reef flats and just exploring, picking up brittle stars and hermit crabs like in those pictures, and just poking around and like discovering what was there. As a very young child, probably around the age 8, a family member, because of this love of the ocean and exploring and figuring out what all the different critters were, suggested that I become a marine biologist, and it just kind of stuck. I know that's not typical, but I've essentially wanted to do what I'm doing now since I was a little kid. So it really did guide pretty much all my decisions in terms of education and career choices up until this point to kind of get me to where I am today. So my parents were big believers in having an education, and how having a strong education really opens up a lot of doors. So from pretty much grade 9, I was going to university fairs every year and learning about different programs. And I ended up deciding to go to the University of Guelph, where I did a Bachelor of Science in Marine and Freshwater Biology. So Guelph was a great fit for me because it was far enough away that I could live away from home, but close enough that I could get home and visit fairly regularly. They had a strong marine and freshwater biology program, even though they are inland Canada. They have a picture, that picture there is of the Aqua Lab, where they are able to do a lot of research because of this special facility that they have set up. And I loved my time at the University of Guelph. It was a great little university town. I made lots of great friends, and it had a lot of great supports as a student. There was a lot of opportunities to get help and assistance if you were struggling, to try to make sure that everyone succeeded. So I was so fortunate to be able to do an exchange while I was at the University of Guelph for my undergrad, and I went to the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. So I just wanted to mention this exchange because this was kind of a big kind of pivotal switch in what I thought I wanted to do, because up until that point, I really did think I wanted to be more like a pure natural scientist, pure marine biologist, out in the field, in a lab, collecting data, writing reports, testing hypotheses. But this semester abroad kind of changed my point of view and made me think more about what is called natural resource management. So how we use our resources, so how we use science and other different information sources to make decisions about how best to use our resources so we can be successful now, but also have resources into the future. So during this exchange, I was able to take courses that all had field components because I really wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to maximize on being in Fiji, on being in a completely different part of the world from where I was used to. So 2 key points kind of stood out from that experience. One was we did a course where we went to visit a community that was downstream of a hydroelectric dam. This was a small, remote community, not very many resources, not very many opportunities for them in their area. And we got to hear kind of both sides of the development project. So on one hand, a hydroelectric dam has so many benefits. It reduces our reliance on fossil fuels, which reduces our carbon emissions. There was going to be jobs opportunities for the community. It was going to provide them more reliable electricity access. They were in a very remote area where electricity was very expensive and they didn't have steady access. But when we met with the community and got to interview them, we got to hear about some of their concerns. They were worried about what that project would do to the river, that it was right beside their community. That was a river that they were very dependent on. They used it for fishing. It was where they got drinking water and water for cleaning, doing their laundry and cleaning. It was a very important water source to them. And they had lots of concerns about what that dam upstream was going to do to their water source. So that to me was really kind of clicked to me that there was a role for someone to kind of balance all these different points of views, all these opportunities and challenges of different projects. And I thought that maybe that could be something that I could work on in the future. The second standout point for that exchange was in the marine biology course, we got to visit coastal communities and go do surveys on their coral reefs. So in Fiji, the Indigenous communities have like most Indigenous communities, very close relationships to their natural environment. And in Fiji, they have what they call locally managed marine areas, which are based on these traditional ideas that we should close part of the reef for part of the year so that it can regenerate and make sure that we're not over harvesting. So we as students got to go out and survey reefs that had these closed areas and reefs that didn't, and got to see how many more species there were on those reefs with closed areas, how much healthier the corals were. And we got to write up a report about it at the end. But for me, that was where I got kind of my first introduction to marine protected areas and how local communities and stakeholders and interested people could really take a claim and have a stake in protecting our natural environment and being involved in conservation so that we had these resources long into the future. So because of that experience, on my exchange, when I started looking for master's programs, I looked a bit more broadly. I looked at not just kind of the traditional Master of Science programs where you would write a thesis, but I also looked at what other options there were out there that had more of a natural resource management spin to them. And I found the Master of Marine Management program at Dalhousie University here in Halifax. So when I took that program in 2012, it was a 12-month program at that point. So we took courses for the first 2 semesters, and then over the summer, you did an internship while you also wrote your grad project, which was essentially a mini thesis. So for me, a big draw for this program was the internship program, which is a requirement of the program. So for me, I came from a family where I had to take out student loans to go to university. I worked throughout my undergrad. So having that internship where I could get work in my field, which I didn't have previously, was really, really important to me because I thought it was going to help me longer term in finding a career once I graduated. So this program I really enjoyed. It really focused on having strong writing skills, strong presentation skills, reading comprehension. We read a lot of articles and had to be able to discuss them in class. And I really loved that I could kind of tailor the program to what interested me the most. So I got to pick electives that were of most interest to me. For example, as I said, I was very interested in marine protected areas. So I took a whole course just on marine protected areas. But even within the required courses, I could kind of tailor my projects and my work to things that were of most interest to me, and I didn't feel I had that much flexibility in my undergrad as I did in my master's to kind of really focus on what I was interested in. So I actually did my internship with the program I am working with today at the federal government. So at that point, they had a slightly different name. They were called Coastal and Coastal Management Division. But they did what they do today. They work on making and managing marine protected areas. So for my internship, I worked with them on creating indicators that they could use to see how successful the MPAs, the marine protected areas they have, are at governance, cultural, and socioeconomic factors. So beyond just like how many fish species it protects or how healthy the habitat is, also looking at does it have benefits for the people involved as well. So maybe there's more successful fishing, maybe there's more fishing activity, so on and so forth. So I tried to help them kind of round out that work. But unfortunately, at that point in time, they didn't have any jobs for hire. So I actually then went on, once I graduated, I worked as a marine mammal observer in a passive acoustic monitor offshore. So these are some pictures of my time offshore. Those binocular pictures is how I spent most of my days. So for this position, I lived and worked on a vessel for 5 weeks at a time. And primarily my job was to look for whales and dolphins. So there's these types of programs called seismic research, and it's a way that they use to look for where oil and gas is underwater in the offshore environment. So this technology actually makes quite a lot of noise in the underwater environment, and it is believed that it is harmful to marine mammals. It scares them away. It can cause them physical harm. It can disrupt how their feeding behaviors. So because of this, they send out marine mammal observers in Pacific acoustic monitors, which I'll get to in a moment, and have us look for whales and dolphins close to where the research is happening. And if they're too close, depending on the species, we tell them to shut down the research. They have to stop the research until the whale or dolphin is a certain distance away to try to make sure it's not harming them. So the passive acoustic monitor is essentially doing the same work, but they're actually listening for whales and dolphins. So the vessel will tow what is called a hydrophone, which is essentially like a microphone, a giant microphone that's being towed behind the vessel. And then we can use software and headphones, kind of like the ones I'm wearing right now, to listen for the whales and dolphins. So that the passive acoustic monitors are generally used at night, so when you can't see, and also in like low visibility conditions. So like if it was really foggy or really stormy and we couldn't see very well, then we would switch to the passive acoustic monitor. So this job, I also really, I've been very fortunate. I've really enjoyed this work as well. Some of the benefits is that you worked for 5 weeks, and then when you were off for 5 weeks, you were fully off. I did not work. I hung out with my family. I traveled. I had those full 5 weeks off all to myself. One of the challenges with working a 5-week stint, though, is that you do miss stuff. So I remember missing holidays and birthdays because when you're on that vessel for 5 weeks, you're on the vessel for 5 weeks. There's no hopping off for your mom's birthday, for example. Another challenge for this kind of job is that generally it's contract work. So there isn't as much guarantee of long-term work. So if things are going well and there's a lot of projects going on, you can stay super busy and have like a very successful career. But there is the possibility for kind of slow periods in this kind of work. And at that point, it can be quite challenging. And you might not have work for months at a time. So after doing this work, I then spent some time at an environmental consulting firm as a biologist and kind of an environmental scientist as well. I was there for about 2.5 years, and I also really loved this job. For me, my only drawback to this job is that I knew my passion really lied with the ocean and working on ocean projects. And in this job, I was mostly working on projects on land and in freshwater. So I was out, there's a picture of me taking a soil sample. I did a lot of surface water sampling and groundwater sampling. I worked on a lot of landfill monitoring projects. It was a great opportunity and a great way to see a lot of Nova Scotia and get out in the field and be outside working on a regular basis. But because I knew my passion really lied with the ocean, I did apply for a position when I saw one open up with the federal government. And I was quite fortunate to be hired back with, as I said, that same group I did my internship with all those years ago as an oceans biologist. So here's some pictures of me at work. I gotta be honest, most of my days, I look like the picture in the far right in my cubicle, or as you can see me now, in my home office. But there are opportunities to get out in the field and to do education and outreach activities. So the picture on the far left is me on a small surveillance flight. So I got to go out with the fishery officers and do flights over the ocean, looking and keeping an eye on different vessels and seeing what they're doing in the marine protected areas. And the one in the middle is Oceans Day in 2019, pre-COVID, where we had a live event and we had kids come up and check out different species and animals that we had from the deep sea and got to talk to them about it. So in my work, I am super, super fortunate to get to work on creating and managing marine protected areas, which are essentially like parks in the sea, so like national parks in the sea. So if you think of your favorite national park, you are allowed to do certain activities, but there's certain activities that aren't allowed. Like you wouldn't build a city in a national park because you're trying to protect certain species and habitats and keep them there long-term and for the enjoyment of people. So essentially that's what I do in the ocean. I love my work. I love knowing that I'm contributing to the sustainable use and development of our oceans. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It can be quite challenging to try to balance different points of views. Some people want more conservation, some people want less conservation, some people want conservation here to look like this, and some people don't. So it's a lot of trying to balance different points of view and really listening to people to try to understand kind of what at the root is what they're trying to achieve, and also helping them realize that in most cases, they actually all want to achieve the same thing, just maybe in slightly different ways. So I am mindful that I'm probably at my time right now. So I guess I will stop there, but thanks so much for having me, and I'm excited to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. That sounds so cool. Oceans are absolutely amazing. We have a question in chat already. What's the pay like?
So for DFO, when I started as an oceans biologist, so that was about 4 years ago, I think I started at about $60,000 a year. And I also got like benefits and paid vacation, sick leave, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. And maybe just, I know wages have gone out, but do you know what somebody just starting out could expect to make, like if they just graduated from university?
So that is kind of, I think they've gone up a bit. It might be like 63-ish, 65. It's gone up a bit. But that would have been, so in my group, most people have a master's. So education is important in kind of the field that I do. I actually don't think of anyone who works in my program who doesn't have at least a master's, and a couple do have PhDs. So that's kind of the level that we hire at in my group. There are other positions in DFO that would hire with an undergrad, but not so much in my group.
In your group. Excellent. Yeah. So again, if anybody has any questions, and there's another one in chat, is there such a thing as marine linguistics? So like basically how the sea animals communicate.
Oh, I'm sure there are researchers that specifically look at how they communicate. At DFO, I do know a researcher who she leads what's called Team Whale, and they do a lot of research on whale communications, more so to figure out where they are and less so to figure out like what they're saying to each other. But I'm sure there's researchers out there who do that.
Sounds pretty cool if you could understand what the whales were saying, because you know we've heard the whale song and things like that, and it's absolutely amazing. I think. Yeah. So I guess I'll ask a question as we wait for anybody else. A quick one is, how much demand is there for this type of career in Nova Scotia?
So my field, in like working on marine protected areas, it's actually growing. So we have these targets that are kind of international targets on how many marine protected areas we want to make. And they have a new target to protect 25% of our oceans and coastal areas by 2025, and then 30% by 2030. So for at least the next decade, there's going to be a lot more work in this area. And then once you make the sites, you need people to manage them, to take care of them once they're created. So I think there'll be long-term growth in this area.
Excellent. And then another question, what skills do you need to be successful in your job?
Ooh, okay. Strong communication. And that's two-way communication. So I think it's so important to be a very good listener in this type of role. As I said, you have a lot of different people with lots of different opinions. And sometimes you have to dig a little deeper from just what they're saying at the surface to figure out what their real concerns are just below the surface. I think it's really important to be good at managing time. So I jump around from a bunch of different tasks. So I'm talking to you guys right now. After this, I'm going over to work on a presentation for an advisory committee meeting where we're going to try to get input on how a marine protected area should be designed. After that, I have to go to a meeting about a risk assessment. So being the ability to switch tasks pretty rapidly is helpful. And I think just being very open and like willing to learn and just listen to everyone who's involved.
Sounds great. I think that's all of the questions, and we are kind of 2 minutes over our time, but it was very great to hear all about it. Thank you so much, Leah, for joining us.